And the way we're going to wrap up this episode 189 of MediaMonarchy.com is with a little bit of history mystery. U.S. apologizes for syphilis experiment in Guatemala. We have the main report from Reuters posted up with the text, and we also have links to the original report on this story, who broke this story. And that would be the name of which I don't see immediately. Needless to say, we have all the links to you from the Wellesley PDF of this original report, other reports from Vancouver Sun, straight from the State Department, MSNBC, InfoWars, Wikipedia, NPR, on and on. But the way that really breaks this story down, and we will get the clip that'll really break it down for you, from naturalnews.com, Guatemalan STD medical experiments were just one crime in a long history of medical/government collusion to use humans as guinea pigs.
Well, we're going to start with some breaking news, an NBC exclusive, and frankly, a stunning disclosure from the federal government about medical experiments the U.S. conducted on unknowing patients back in the 1940s. Today, officials at the very highest levels of government will apologize. Robert Bazell is NBC's chief science and health correspondent. He has this exclusive story. Robert, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah and Chuck. The officials who will do the apologizing include Secretary of State Clinton and Health and Human Services Secretary Sebelius. From 1946 to 1948, officials with the U.S. Public Health Service injected gonorrhea and syphilis in part of an experiment into people in Guatemala without their permission or consent. And these people included people in mental institutions, included prostitutes who were set loose in prison in an attempt to see how the organisms would spread. It was all part of an effort to learn more about venereal disease after the Second World War, when sexually transmitted diseases had wreaked such havoc on U.S. soldiers. This is a horrible, horrible story. It has no redeeming value. The records were hidden in Washington for many years until a historian at Wellesley University named Susan Reverby found out about them. We're going to hear a lot more about this throughout the day, but there's going to be a lot of apologizing all around.
Bob, this professor found out about it, and then what presumably brought it to the attention of the U.S. government, or in other words,
no, she brought it to the attention of the U.S. government, and the reason, and she was studying and has written extensively about the Tuskegee experiments on syphilis on African American men, and of course this incident inevitably raises comparisons with that horrible incident, where from 1932 until press reports revealed that it was going on in 1972, U.S. government doctors were telling these African-American men that they were treating them for syphilis when in fact they were withholding treatment. So this is a very similar event, although it occurred in Guatemala on Guatemalans. There'll be a lot of apologizing to the nation of Guatemala and to Hispanic residents of the United States.
Bob, did the Guatemalan government ever have any suspicion about this? You know,
I think at that time they were fully cooperative, Chuck. Don't forget that there was a lot of politics between Guatemala and the United States in that time. In 1954, the CIA engineered a coup in Guatemala, but Guatemala was, in many ways, a puppet state. The government was, certainly not the people of the United States.
So they were hiding this as well.
They were hiding this as well. There were a lot of Guatemalan doctors and nurses who were involved in this. But it was under the authority of doctors from the U.S. Public Health Service who were in Guatemala. The samples, for instance, of the syphilis organism were taken from the lab in Staten Island and flown to Guatemala to be injected into people without their consent.
All right, Bob Bazell with the breaking news. And just to reiterate for people just tuning in, Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius will do a public apology today for experiments that happened back in the 40s. The U.S. government intentionally injecting Guatemalans with syphilis and gonorrhea.
Cooperation from the Guatemalan government. Obviously, you also heard that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is also going to be issuing an apology.
So more on that as we go forward.
There was an extraordinary apology today from President Obama for something that happened more than 60 years ago. The U.S. conducted secret medical experiments that involved intentionally infecting Guatemalan mental patients with sexually transmitted diseases. Tonight, Guatemala is calling it a crime against humanity and says it may take the case to an international court. NBC's chief science correspondent Robert Bazell broke the story this morning. He has this late update tonight.
The secret experiments took place in Guatemala between 1946 and 1948, financed by the U.S. government and supervised by U.S. government doctors. Susan Riverby, a professor at Wellesley College, who has studied medical malfeasance extensively, found the evidence in U.S. government records.
I thought that, frankly, that I wouldn't get shocked, but I thought this one was pretty horrific. The details of how they did it were pretty graphic, and I was actually quite surprised.
The doctors inoculated almost 700 prostitutes, institutionalized mental patients, and prisoners with the germs that cause either syphilis or gonorrhea. The subjects did not give their permission and were not told what was happening. They were injected in the skin, the genitals, even the spine. Infected female prostitutes were also sent into the prison and mental hospital to infect men.
They knew that this wasn't appropriate. The Surgeon General even said we couldn't do this in the United States.
The miracle of penicillin.
The experiments were designed to study the effects of penicillin on sexually transmitted disease. Still, as many as a third of the patients were not properly treated. Today, outrage on the streets of Guatemala's capital and in newspapers online, and from Guatemalan Americans in Los Angeles.
Actually, I'm very surprised and upset. It's like a combination of feelings because it's been a long time already, but it's something outrageous, I would call it.
The incident recalls the infamous Tuskegee, Alabama syphilis experiment.
What is now called the Tuskegee experiment began here in 1932.
From 1932 until the research was revealed in the press in 1972, government doctors lied to hundreds of African-American men who were infected naturally. The doctors, some also involved in the Guatemala experiment, told the men they were getting treatment, but in fact they were not. Despite numerous apologies, that incident has left many black Americans wary of the medical establishment.
It still resonates after generations and generations, and people still talk about it. So this legacy of mistrust in the African American community still exists.
Even though the Guatemala experiment took place more than 60 years ago, officials today call on the prestigious Institute of Medicine to launch a full investigation and identify steps to prevent further abuses. Another example of the most vulnerable being victimized and of doctors who ignore their pledge to first do no harm. Robert Bazell, NBC News, New York.
And these are the kind of monstrous things that they put in films like Shutter Island, and you think it couldn't really be real. And it's just more documentation. The other couple quickly history mystery notes. October 7th, 1940 is the day that should have lived in infamy. That would be the date of the infamous but not very well known McCollum Memo that basically advocated we should provoke Japan into attacking us at Pearl Harbor, which they would do a year and 3 months after that. McCollum Memo. Undocumented language found hidden in India. And our final note, we don't have time for the clip, but it is an important one thanks to BrassCheckTV.com asking who killed the electric streetcar? And the answer to that question is General Motors, also now known as Government Motors. I wish we could spend more time going through these stories and fleshing them out and giving a bit of greater understanding to myself and hopefully you as we glance back at the breaking news, as we've covered some of the developments surrounding the loss of 95,000 jobs in the United States in September. Bank of America actually halting foreclosures in all 50 states, Jim Jones stepping down as National Security Advisor, and the Chinese dissident winning the Nobel Peace Prize. The latest we see related to this, China blanks Nobel Peace Prize searches. And that's the kind of internet controls that folks like Lieberman and others are calling for here in the States. Quickly now, creepy customers coming to MediaMonarchy.com in the past week. Idaho National Laboratory out of Idaho Falls. United States Senate out of the District of Criminals. They Googled National Level Exercise, DHS. Macmillan McGraw-Hill School Publishing Company out of New York. They were also reading about National Level Exercise. Terror drills going on all around. Oregon Health and Science University, California Department of Water Resources, California Department of Corrections, and finally, of course, headquarters USAISC, Armed Forces Europe Division. This has been another jam-packed episode of Media Monarchy. This has been episode 189 for October 8th, 2010. My name's James Evan Pilato. I'm your host and webmaster of the site and show at MediaMonarchy.com. And as my man Richard Grove of TragedyandHope.com would say, thanks for tuning in and not dropping out. Or as Webster Tarpley would say, get active or get radioactive. What we've taken as our sort of motto and battle cry here on MediaMonarchy.com from Jello Biafra, don't hate the media, become the media. Take care.
MediaMonarchy.com is your source for alternative news, politics, conspiracies and cover-ups. Featuring weekly radio shows on the Portland Radio Authority, PRAradio.org, the New World Next Week video series with CorbettReport.com, plus special interview episodes, B-sides, mixtapes and so much more. Send news tips to MediaMonarchy@gmail.com. You can make a donation, or mail media to the Monarchy, at P.O. Box 12165, Portland, Oregon 97212. Thanks to all the internet and community radio stations who broadcast these shows, and most of all, thanks to you. Remember, don't hate the media, become the media.
Whether you went on with the diary, or whether you did not go on with it, made no difference. The thought police would get him just the same.
It has the power to change you in ways you've never dreamed of.